A machine appeared in 1886. It had just three wheels and only 0.75 horsepower. It could barely move faster than a walking person. But every car we use today started with this exact machine. This vehicle was the first true automobile that could move without rails, and it changed the world forever. So how did this simple machine create modern cities, roads, and transportation? That story starts right here. In 1886, the world looked very different from today. Cities were small, roads were rough and unplanned, and people were still dependent on animals for transportation. Horse-drawn carriages had barely changed for centuries. They worked on the same basic principles. They had the same speed limits, and they suffered from the same problems. They were slow. Maintenance was expensive. Feeding, housing, and caring for horses created serious costs. As cities grew, this system started causing more and more trouble. Narrow streets, rising populations, and expanding trade made transportation harder. People wanted to move faster, but personal transportation was stuck in the past. The Industrial Revolution was transforming the world. Factories were increasing production. Steam engines were powering trains and ships. Long distances could now be crossed much faster. Yet despite all this progress, personal transportation was still outdated. Trains were locked to rails. Ships were limited to water. In everyday life, people still relied on horses. What humanity needed was clear: a vehicle not tied to rails, not dependent on animals, a machine that could move by its own power. And this is where a German engineer named Carl Benz entered the picture. For Carl Benz, this idea wasn't just an engineering challenge, it was a vision of the future. For years, Benz worked on internal combustion engines. At the time, building an engine was extremely difficult, but the real challenge wasn't making one, it was making it reliable. The engine had to run continuously. Fuel had to burn in a controlled way. The power had to be transferred smoothly to the wheels. Each of these was a major obstacle with 19th century technology. Carl Benz failed many times. He struggled financially. His projects were criticized. Many people around him believed the idea would never work. But Benz didn't give up. And finally, in 1886, the Benz patent motor wagon was born. This vehicle had three wheels. It used a single-cylinder gasoline engine. It produced about 0.75 horsepower. By today's standards, those numbers seem almost meaningless. But back then, power wasn't the key point. Independence was. This machine wasn't tied to rails. It didn't need horses. The driver could turn the steering and go wherever they wanted. That had never happened before. For the first time in history, a vehicle was truly independent. The three-wheel design wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate engineering choice. At the time, steering systems were still primitive. Controlling a four-wheeled vehicle was extremely difficult. Maintaining balance was a major problem. A three-wheel layout reduced those issues. It required fewer parts. It was lighter, and it was easier to control. Today it might look strange or primitive, but under 19th century engineering conditions, it was a very logical solution. The patent motor wagon wasn't built as a showpiece. It wasn't made for exhibitions. It was a working prototype, and soon it would face the real world. When the patent motor wagon first entered public streets, no one knew it would change history. It wasn't accepted by society yet. To many people, it looked like a pointless experiment. Reactions were mixed. Some watched in awe. Some stepped back in fear. Others openly called it ridiculous. It was noisy. It broke down often. It struggled on hills. The roads weren't built for automobiles. They were muddy, rocky, and uneven. That made the vehicle seem even more dangerous. Many people ask the same question: why do we need this when we already have horse carriages? Society simply wasn't ready for the automobile. Despite all the criticism, Carl Benz kept working. But the person who truly changed the fate of the automobile wasn't Carl Benz himself. It was his wife, Bertha Benz. In 1888, without Carl's knowledge, Bertha made a bold decision. She took the patent motor wagon and set off on a journey. This wasn't a simple test drive. It became the first long-distance automobile journey in history. Bertha Benz planned to travel nearly 100 kilometers. At the time, that distance was unbelievable. There was no infrastructure, no gas stations, no repair services, no spare parts. But she didn't stop. Along the way, she solved every problem herself. She bought fuel from pharmacies, which created the very first concept of buying fuel. She dealt with engine failures. She cleaned parts. She made adjustments. She realized the brakes were inadequate. And that discovery later led to the development of proper braking systems. This trip wasn't just a drive. It was a real-world field test. Without realizing it, Bertha Benz directly contributed to the development of the automobile. And most importantly, she proved that the car actually worked, not just in theory, but in real life. After Bertha Benz's journey, nothing was the same. The patent motor wagon was no longer just an experiment. It had proven itself in the real world. Public perception slowly began to change. Doubt turned into curiosity, and curiosity turned into acceptance. Carl Benz used this interest wisely. He continued improving the design. He made engines more powerful. He made vehicles more reliable. Slowly but surely, the automobile became part of everyday life. Still, the Benz patent motor wagon was never mass-produced. It never reached large audiences. Most people never drove one, but that didn't reduce its importance. Because this machine made one idea possible: movement without rails, transportation without horses. That idea inspired other engineers and entrepreneurs. The automobile didn't remain a one-man project. It became an industry. Over time, cars began to reshape cities. Roads were redesigned. Cities expanded. People started living farther from where they worked. Transportation became a form of personal freedom. The automobile wasn't just a machine. It was a force that transformed society. It changed where people lived, how they worked, and even their daily habits. And at the very beginning of all this transformation stood a simple machine built in 1886. Today, the automotive world looks completely different. Electric cars fill the roads. Autonomous driving systems are being developed. Artificial intelligence is now part of vehicle decision-making. But none of these technologies appeared out of nowhere. They all trace their roots back to the Benz patent motor wagon. This machine teaches us an important lesson. Technological revolutions don't always start strong. Sometimes they begin slowly, quietly, and imperfectly. The first step is usually the hardest and the riskiest. But when the idea is right, it eventually changes the world. Behind the millions of cars on the road today, there is a single step taken in 1886. This wasn't just a vehicle. It was the moment humanity took control of movement. For the first time, people could reach where they wanted to go by their own decisions. And that's why the Benz patent motor wagon is remembered not only as the first automobile, but as the beginning of the modern world. This story doesn't end here. In the next video, we'll see how this idea reached the masses. The machine that turned the automobile from a luxury for the rich into something accessible to everyone. The Ford Model T.